Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. Tonight we have a great program. Dr. Chet Snow, Ph.D., is an internationally acclaimed author, lecturer, and regression therapist with degrees from Columbia University and the Sorbonne. He lives with his wife Callista in Sedona, Arizona, long recognized as sacred by Native Americans. Their house, built by members of the White Lodge of England, was once home to the Hopi spiritual leader White Bear. In 1991, Dr. Snow met with spiritual elders of the Hopi Nation and photographed their prophetic petroglyphs. Struck by the similarities between them and the British crop circle formations, he began to explore the phenomenon. Since then, he's traveled to England every July to compare the circle symbolisms with ancient markings from indigenous cultures worldwide. According to Snow, crop circles are like ephemeral agricultural cathedrals. Many of the formations are clustered around the 4,000 to 5,000-year-old Neolithic sites of Avebury and Stonehenge, where our distant ancestors worshiped the stars. He goes on to say that scientific research has confirmed that significant changes at the cellular level occur in plants within crop circle formations. The phenomenon is clearly intelligently controlled, planned, and has been evolving over the last decade. But, as with many other miracles, the mainstream media has largely put this down and ignored it. Recently, returned from his annual expedition to Wiltshire, England, Dr. Snow joins MUFON LA to present his latest news, research, and examples of the 2004 formations. Dr. Snow is the author of Mass Dreams of the Future, Transformational Journeys, a guided audio meditation, and 2 videos, Earth Shift and Star Visions, a history of the crop circle enigma. A former president of the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies, Dr. Snow edits the annual Mass Dreams newsletter. Since 1998, he and Callista have hosted several international conferences, including America's annual Crop Circle Conference, Signs of Destiny. Please let's all welcome Dr. Chet Snow.
Thank you. Seeing as how you're about 3 feet taller than I am, I do feel a little bit like a gray here. Okay, how's that? Good. I think that will work better. I'm going to come back down off the stage just for 1 minute, and that is that my wife and I do keep a mailing list, and I know some of you have received the newsletter from me. If you've gotten our newsletter recently, just put your name on this paper. If you haven't, we would like to get your name, address, email, etc. Can I give this to you? And if you'll just let people pass it along as I talk, that'll work fine. Thank you, sir. So if you've already gotten the newsletter, why then just your name so we know you were here, and otherwise the paperwork. So this is the Mass Dreams newsletter. Just so you see it, it's 1 or 2 pages, and that we do it every fall. Mass Dreams was the name of my book, Mass Dreams of the Future. And inside the newsletter there is a folder also about the Signs of Destiny 2004 conference, which will be coming up, and it's particularly important because we are going to talk this year not only about the crop circles, but also the Jose Arguelles will be our guest, and John Major Jenkins to tell us about the Mayan calendar and the road to 2012. I'm very sorry that the Crop Circle Calendar 2005 version did not make it from England for this trip. It will be in Arizona by next week, but just a little bit too tight timing for that, because one of the things that they have now done at the Wiltshire Crop Circle Study Group, the main study group into crop circles over there, is to incorporate the Mayan dating system into our Western calendar to show people how the two dovetail and how they work together. You will see when I get into my talk why I consider this to be important. The crop circle phenomenon does fit into the Mayan calendar and Mayan and Native American prophecy systems. I'm not going to talk too much about that tonight, but I will talk a little bit in a few minutes about it. Also, speaking of Native Americans, this magazine, Four Corners magazine, with a beautiful portrait of a Native American, is on the back table. It is free. It is from Arizona, and it has my most recent crop circle article. Again, an annual review of the crop circle phenomenon. So feel free to stop at the table back there where we have the crop circle yearbooks and other pieces of literature, plus t-shirts that are imported from England that my beautiful wife will have. And we do have copies of this magazine that we brought over also for free. So I'm going to, with no further ado from there, go into a short video clip that was made by a friend of ours named Jennifer Stein, who is a semi-professional videographer and who actually came to Wiltshire, England with my wife and myself in 2003 on one of our crop circle investigation research tours. We do between 1 and 2 such tours each summer, taking only 10 people into the fields in a small enough group that you can get a real sense of what is happening and a first-hand experience of the phenomenon, and yet a group that can come together and have all of the dynamics that that involves as well. So I'm going to show that first, and then as soon as that stops, I will start with the slides without any interruption. Can we do the video, please? And maybe this light can go off me.
Small groups, we don't want more than 10 people basically to the crop circle since 1998. But 8-10 people, you can actually do a very nice group kind of experience, and yet at the same time get some enough of the smalls that you can get individually interested in and into the circle, and each person can bring something to the circle.
We also looked at some other landmarks in the area, like Silver Hill, some of the long barrel burial graves, which are really fascinating. We also went to Salisbury Cathedral. Part of the trip's experience involved going to the Wiltshire Crop Circle Conference, which is put on by a number of coordinators, most significant in Francine Blue.
I tend to think of the crop circle phenomenon as actually being more important in terms of the people that it's generating than the symbols that are happening in the fields themselves.
I was fascinated to meet people from all over the country that had very similar interests in the crop circles like I do.
Although they may have a message for us, they may be time markers, as some people have suggested, which would mean that they have very little to do with us actually at all, except that they're marking a period of time that's very important. I think what is wonderful with the crop circles is that we have this opportunity to be on the first line, as it were, right in the front row of an event that is happening. And if you think back on this, you find that every time a new paradigm has come into the world, there have been just a handful of people, when it was first occurring or happening, or when a world teacher was here, that were involved with him or her, or the paradigm. And then, usually after it had stopped, or after the person had passed away, had left the planet, the information began to spread out like ripples on a pond. So here we have this opportunity, is the way I see it, to be in that position with other people who are self-selected. Nobody forces people to come to visit crop circles. In fact, most of us are here because we can't not be here. We're bitten by a bug, you might say.
The great thing about the crop circle phenomenon is that it's a phenomenon you can walk into physically. You can sit down in a field, you can see it out in front of you. The more you study it, the more you look at the scientific evidence, the blown nodes, the cell structure changes, the micron iron-sized balls that are showing up in the soil samples, the more you begin to realize that there's something really odd going on here.
And what I would say is a paradigm change, because what do crop circles? They challenge our basic paradigms.
You know, the phenomenon itself is just so absolutely incomprehensible. If you try to comprehend it with our current logic, it just does not fit our current logic, because our current logic is based on a mechanical understanding of the world.
So some people are very threatened by it. And I can understand that, and I empathize with that, in fact. But I guess I grew up or was meant to be a paradigm buster somewhere, and that's what I think we're doing. I think we're putting a seed down, and people like yourself are documenting that in a medium that will have some, longevity. Others are bringing people together. That's what we're trying to do now in the States, from England and from other places. And the interesting thing is, I'm convinced, Jennifer, that the energy will follow the interest. As we build interest, let's say in the United States, about this phenomenon, more circles and more complex circles and more interesting circles will start to follow this energy of the people that are involved. And I've seen this over 12 years' time here in England. I've seen it starting in Germany with our friends in Germany. We've gone to Germany 2 to 3 years now and gone into some of their circles. I think it's starting to happen in Italy, but it really isn't about who made a crop circle or not. It's about what is our relationship to the phenomenon that's occurring.
It seems like we just see almost on a two-dimensional. We see the level of the crop, and then we see the lovely pattern in the circles themselves or the shapes. And I think they go into the earth, and that they're more, that they reach into the sky.
Crop circle, and so you can go on the left, you can go straight or on the right, and it's different for each person. It depends on your energy and different things. And so it's good to know which way you need to go. And some people don't think, if they don't have the dowsing rod in their hand, they don't think to ask the question for themselves. So by giving them the dowsing rod, it's like, oh yeah, I need to ask.
My wife has eagle eyes. My wife can spot crop circles from the ground better than anybody that I know. When we drive, especially before we're with a group, we try to go out and locate and look, and she has had wonderful experience with that. In fact, she is the one who spotted the triple Julia set in 1996.
It was
rainy, misty day.
Yeah.
Like Friday, it was a terrible day.
We were just driving by.
I was driving and I said,
Yeah.
look, a crop circle. And I continued to drive. I did not think of stopping.
Right. So I said, stop the car right now. And we turned around and we drove up the little lane, and there it was by Windmill Hill, and it was like 490 circles in this thing. It was a huge, huge circle, and you could only see a little thin line of it from the roadside, but she had caught it, and so that's how we went in.
We had a young fellow on the trip with us from Chicago. He was about 14 years old, and he was quite skeptical when he came on the trip, and after a week of going in the crop circles, he was thinking more deeply about this phenomenon.
So, originally I thought it was a big hoax, but now I think, I mean, you gotta see it for yourself, but it's quite amazing, and I don't think any human can make such a thing. I mean, it's so detailed and everything's perfectly laid out.
The other thing that they arrange for is a helicopter trip right from this conference, so you can drive to a local farm and take a 35-minute helicopter ride and see these formations aerially. That makes all the difference in the world in really grasping the complexity and the beauty and the magnificence of these formations.
Several ghosts to see, including South Field. So by that I mean the crop has been replanted, but the last year's circle is still visible in the new crop.
There was a reporter from the Toronto Star named Vicki Stevens who traveled with us, and at one of the stops we made, we were actually able to meet the farmer named Tim Carson. And Vicki asked him a couple questions about what he thought was going on in his fields.
Well, I've had 5 this year already. There's 2 over here. There's 1 in Eastfield, and there's 2 by the White Horse.
What do you think about these things? What's your take on it?
Pretty fed up with them then.
Are you?
Yeah.
I bet. What does it mean to you?
Well, we've had 3 in the last week, which, you know, is so close to harvest, and it just knocks the crop down. You can't harvest it. But because you can't pick it up with the harvester, when we come to plough it, there's too much trash to bury. And so when we plant the new crop, the trash attracts slugs, and the slugs eat all the new shoots. So in quite a few of the fields, you can see where last year's circles were because of the damage that was done to the new crop we see the following year. So you get on
are caused by slugs eating the new shoots?
Yeah, because there's so much trash there.
Oh, I see.
They're great works of art, but I'm not quite sure why they keep choosing my fields.
What do you think makes them?
I don't know. I mean, some of these big ones are just too perfect. You know, I led a couple of hoaxes in one year to make a car similar to that one, Mitsubishi. Yeah.
Right.
And it took 2 hoaxes 12 hours of daylight to make the basic shape of a car.
Huh.
So it just, you know, and they weren't, you know, they didn't have to do it undercover or anything like that. So it just makes me wonder how these things appear in the dark. They obviously don't use torches or talk to each other or anything like that because you hear it.
I've had a couple of people suggest to me that these crop circles are appearing because somebody's figured out that they bring all kinds of people, and it's a good moneymaker, and that the farmers themselves are making it.
No,
What do you think? What do you say?
Certainly don't, you know, you don't go to all the trouble of growing crops to then go out and flatten. If someone came along and said, here's 10 grand, come and make a crop circle, then it's not a problem because that's more than what the crop's worth.
Right.
But no one does. So, you know, because this farm is so famous for its crop circles, you know, we've done a few adverts and things like that. But, you know, I get paid for that, so you don't mind.
The other thing that happened is a few of us decided to take an ultralight flight, which was an additional cost not included in the trip. Flying in an ultralight plane is sort of like flying in a go-kart with a lawnmower engine in the front of you or above you. It's quite small, it's a little rickety, it's very reasonable, and a great way to see the formations.
Well, here in 2003, we are being given not only that, but we were given a beautiful circle that I do feel has meaning, that is indigenous in nature and says balance is being restored. There is a balance again, and that balance is there to lift you up. That was the one at Green Street in Avebury, where as I pointed out, it is totally straight lines. Yeah, embedded within those pentagrams and triangles of that totally straight line circle, there were lovely circles in the leg, not visible with the standing crop, but totally in how it was swirled, and they were done in an amazingly balanced way, counterclockwise in the pentagrams and clockwise in the triangles. This was saying there's a balance coming back, that even though on the outside and to the world point of view, we are heading into all types of disasters, and these disasters may well get more attention in the years to come. It may feel more difficult to people, but nonetheless, within those straight lines and that difficulty, the circles of spirit exist, but you will only find them if you take the time, the trouble, expend the energy to go within and within the formations to see them.
On gates.
A little obelisk. They are marking.
They mark the stone we are missing.
Yeah.
This is the root system.
Yeah. This is probably, this whole hill is all root.
Oh, sure.
Because these are the ancient, non-original trees. You know, these and the chestnuts and everything, and the oaks. That's the traditional tree of England, Europe, continent. Because the fir trees are being poisoned.
Thank you, and I thank Jennifer for her wonderful work. And in fact, I realize that we have one of the people who came with us on that journey in 2003 is actually here tonight, so I hope she enjoyed seeing her own image among many of the others, and of course the great experiences and times we had together. If you're interested, at the back table there is a copy, some copies of my newsletter, and you can also reach us, as I say, at our website, chetsnow.com, or in Sedona, Arizona. Want to go on because I think, I hope that that has whetted your appetite a little bit, sort of a crop circle tidbit, and hopefully now we can offer some more of the main course. The first thing that I want to do is to put the crop circle phenomenon in a little bit of perspective. I was trained as a historian and sociologist. That's my background before working for the United States Air Force for many years, and then working as a regression therapist for about the last 20 years. So the book that I wrote is called Mass Dreams of the Future, and the subtitle is a very key part of that experience for me, as I ask people, are we facing an apocalypse or a global spiritual awakening? The choice is ours. And now, 15 years later, I still feel very strongly that these are the choices that are being put before us, and that we still have the possibility to choose. Before we get into more of the crop circles, I just want to say one word. It's in the newsletter, and if you get a copy at the back of the room, you can read more about it. There is a book on the back table there by a man named John English. John is a shaman from Phoenix, and a very interesting fellow whom I only recently met. His name came into my knowledge by one of my readers, actually, who alerted me to his book a few months ago, and then, as always seems to happen, by a series of meaningful coincidences, his name was brought back to me. And I mention this because what he has done in this book called The Shift and Awakening is to take a vision in a novel form, that is to say in a fictional form, of what this country might become if we, the people, the citizens, in a grassroots movement, were to take over from the special interests and the politicians and the powers at be and reclaim the democratic and Republican heritage that is in fact ours, and those are with small d's and small r's, and take back this extraordinary country. And as we go into this electoral period, it is something to ponder, and if you are at all interested in the possibility and have dreamed of that possibility, why I would recommend the book. He is going to come to our conference. I invited him specifically, even though we had our speaker roster was full. I cut a few minutes out of lunch on Saturday because I just think that the message that he gives is too important to ignore, that we can use the tools that are available today with internet and instant communication, and not forget the grassroots movements that swept through a la the Howard Dean phenomenon and things like that, and bring our country back to sanity in the world, and hopefully in the very near future this will be something that we will do. I say that in context of the crop circles because I think with crop circles, I mentioned the Mayan calendar, this concept that in 2012 we are going to go through a great transition point or a turnover point of the calendar that is a cyclical calendar that is thousands and thousands of years old, a calendar that stresses the fact that every day has a specific relationship in the sun and the energy of the sun that warms our planet and actually provides us with the tools of material life, because without the sun for even a few seconds we would not be able to sustain life here on our planet, and also has a tone or a harmony, a musical component to it that is also very important. And these were concepts the ancient Mayans had that we have forgotten, that we have lost, that frankly all the ancestors of our peoples had all across the planets, in all cultures, in all races, in all continents of the world. And it is a view of how we see each day and how we wake up to each day that is different, that I do feel we need to return to if we are going to participate in this possibility of a global spiritual awakening and avoid an apocalypse. We are at the point of the Mayan calendar right here just before 2012, a very long cycle that began as far back as 3113 BC, well before Western civilization, just the beginning of the Egyptian civilization as we know it, the archaic period, and some say the pyramids themselves, at least some of them, date from that time. As we approach this final portion of that calendar toward the winter solstice of 2012, we're reminded that the Mayans themselves saw history as great cycles, and one of the cycles that they realized was that we were coming into a time that would be great change, and that the spirituality of life, or the realization of the spiritual nature of life, would all but be extinguished on the face of the earth. There was a prophecy that was current among the Mayans and later among the Aztecs, who took over the Central American leadership from the Mayans, that at some point in the far distant past there had been beings of great stature and power that some called gods, some called the supermen, the greater than men, that had gone away after leaving and planting the seeds of civilization. And they had told the people and their leadership that someday they would return, but that there would be a test when they returned. And the test would be to understand what would be the symbol of their return and of their passage. And so all the great pyramids of the Mayas have 9 platforms. They have 9 steps to them. This is the one at Palenque, but they all basically have a set of 9 levels. And that is because the prophecy said that when you see beings who seem to be superhuman or have a greater power than yours coming to you, especially out of the east and possibly from clouds, remember sailing ships looked like clouds in ancient times to native peoples, that you must look and see what symbol they would show you. And if the symbol that they showed you was this one, the circle inscribed around an equal-armed cross, the four directions, which symbolizes the spirit surrounding the physical four directions of matter, then there would be a period of 9 times 52 years of heaven on earth, or of great abundance, of great growth and prosperity for the native peoples of the area of Mesoamerica of America. Why 52 years? 52 years happens to be when 2 of the Mayan calendar periods come back together, so that a day has the same meaning every 52 years, has the same sun relationship and the same musical harmonious tone relationship in their calendar system, so that it was a very sacred number to them. That is 468 years. Now, what happened was, of course, that the Spanish arrived looking very similar to the descriptions of the ancient supermen or gods of the Mesoamerican peoples, looking very different from them, wearing strange headdresses, which also were considered to be a mark of the gods, sort of helmets and with antenna or crowns sticking out of them. They also came from the east. They came in what looked like clouds, because the ships with their great sails looked like clouds. Unfortunately, they came bearing a different symbol. They came bearing this symbol. Whoops. Oh dear, something happened here. Just a minute. One more. There, they came bearing this symbol, the elongated cross, where the crossbar, the vertical crossbar, was much longer than the horizontal crossbar. And the prophecy had continued to say, now if they come bearing this symbol, that means that they have forgotten the true spiritual teachings of the ancestors, of those who had wisdom. They have lost, and they therefore will come and create 9 times 52 years of hell on earth for you. And that there will be a great extinguishment of spiritual value and an incredible growth of materialism and only of thinking of material value. Well, we know that Cortes landed at Mexico in the year 1519. So it's very interesting. He brought this cross, and I guess that the Mayan and Aztec people that he associated with there said, uh-oh, it's hitting the fan. We're in for it for 400 and some years of terrible, terrible experiences. And in fact, that was very true. So they tried to placate him with gold, because that had been the metal of the gods. And they thought maybe if he takes the gold, and he will go away and he won't bother us. But of course, as we all know, the opposite was the truth, that they were so greedy that the very sight of the gold just spurred them on to greater and more terrible things happening. What's interesting is the mathematics of this. If you add 1519, the year of the false return of the gods, and 9 times 52, or 468 years, you get the ending of that period of the hells at a very significant date, a very interesting one by the Mayan calendar, and that is August of 1987. Some of you may remember that that is the time that Jose Arguelles, artist and then an author who became in a way a prophet of the new way of looking at time, the ancient way of looking at time coming back, that was the harmonic convergence date of 1987. And the interesting thing about that is that the crop circle movement and the crop circle's appearances has followed remarkably accurately the changes taking place with the Mayan calendar. This circle is the one that came closest to the date of the harmonic convergence in 1987. And what is the symbol? Clearly it is the circle surrounding the equal-armed cross again. So you see, even though the Spanish, the Europeans came with the elongated cross, or let's call it the false cross, we find that the circles brought us in the ending of that time period of ancient hell of 1987, the true symbol again, the spiritual equal symbol, that of spirit and matter in balance and in harmony. Now, what is also very interesting is that the modern day crop circle phenomenon, and I say it that way because we now have pretty good evidence that there have been crop circles for hundreds, if not thousands, of years across the British landscape, but there were usually not very many. They were rather few and far between. The modern phenomenon began in the late 1970s when people began to notice and the pictures were taken. And from 1978 until 1987, that first 9-year period, there were on average between 8 and 12 circles or formations of circles in any given summer. They really didn't exceed that number. And then, just after the harmonic convergence, that August of 1987 date, which took place at the end of the crop circle growing season, because of course the circles follow the northern hemisphere growing season where the crops are planted in April or March and April, and they begin to mature in May, June, July, and they're harvested then in July and August basically. So that is the time when the circles come. We found that the next year, the summer of 1988, suddenly there was a blossoming of crop circles across the Wiltshire countryside. Significantly, 51 came within an 8-week period around the ancient stone circle of Avebury. And if you look at the stone circle of Avebury from the air, what do you find? And I thank Barbara Lamb, who's in attendance, for her photo of this. We've used many different photographers' views of this phenomenon over the years. What do you find? You find the circle surrounding the equal armed cross again. And if you take 51 crop circles and the Avebury stone circle, you of course get 52, the sacred number of the Mayans. Now this is not the only time that this particular geometric formation has come in the crop circle phenomenon. They have called them the Celtic cross, which is a circle or 4 crosses, 4 dots in the 4 directions with another center, 5th circle in the center. This has been really at the heart of the modern day crop circle phenomenon. And one of the most interesting aspects of it has been that in a little place called Martock, which interestingly is in Somerset, it's closer to Glastonbury than it is to Wiltshire, there has been an expansion of that idea, the circle with the equal armed cross going out in all of the directions. And what's unusual with this is that this particular crop circle appeared not just one year, but actually 2 different years. It's quite unusual for formations of crop circles to appear identically or nearly identically year after year. That's one of the hallmarks of the crop circle phenomenon. It is an incredibly creative phenomenon. The creativity of it is something that boggles the minds of all of us who look at it closely, and perhaps anyone who sees the annual calendars that come out or the yearbooks that are now being published of the aerial photographs of the amazing geometric formation shapes that are being put forward. It's so creative and inventive. But this formation came again 2 years later in 1998 in just a very slightly different format. Quite interesting. And it made me wonder, when this occurred in the late 1990s, what was special about Martock? And I found out that Martock had the unusual experience of basically escaping the bubonic plague, which swept Europe in the 15 and 1600s, when wiping out whole villages, actually ultimately in a 50-year period killing over half of the population of many of the sections of Western Europe and the Mediterranean lands. And why did Martock escape? Well, no one really knew, but the people in Thanksgiving, they created a lot of statues of angels, and they put the angels inside and on the roof of their church. And that church still today has statues of angels, and it's called the Angel Village in some of the guidebooks because there are supposed to be more statues of angels there. So I said, well, are angels watching over us? Are they giving us the crop circle signs? I don't know. Then somebody came to one of my talks just a couple of years ago, and they came up to me afterward. I had told the story of Martock, and they said, you might not be aware, but that village has actually come back into the news in a very specific way among a select group of researchers. What they found was they were very interested in why that village had escaped the plague. And they realized that there might be some particular enzyme or perhaps a genome or something like this in the inhabitants that led to that escaping. So they went, some genetic scientists went to there and they took samples from people who knew their bloodlines went back in that village, and indeed they found that the people of that area who have been the families that have been there for thousands of years do carry a special gene that apparently helps to fight certain bacterial infections. Isn't that interesting? In that little village. And yet that village then is being pointed out to us in the crop circles with the very symbol that the ancients gave to the Mayans, to the Native Americans, as to be the symbol, the spiritual symbol that would herald the correct return of the Superman, the correct return of the gods, if you will, the correct transition into a new age. Also fascinating, right after my wife and I had been in the circle, we actually went to Marcoc and visited it. We happened to travel to France. She's a native of France, but she had never been to the very famous Chartres Cathedral. And so I said, well, we're going to drive back across France after we leave England, so let's take a detour and go to Chartres. And there in Chartres Cathedral, we were quite amazed to find the same symbolism in some of the wonderful stained glass windows for which it is so famous, which has sparked us into a greater interest in how the medieval alchemists and those that constructed the incredibly beautiful Gothic cathedrals, their use of sacred geometry and their knowledge of ancient sacred principles dovetails in with the crop circle phenomenon of today. And there have been many other examples, but this was a very striking one that we wanted to share with you. Now, another aspect of the sacred geometry that comes up in many crop circles is the Vesica Pisces. The Vesica Pisces is formed, as you see here, in very old Roman cistern. It is formed by the intersection of two circles in such a way that it forms this oval shape. This was taken at one point as a symbol of the fish, which was used by early Christians as a spiritual symbol, but it goes way back before that time, and it has been long considered to be a symbol of the Mother Earth, or the Earth Goddess, because of course it also could symbolize the opening of the womb. You will also find, interestingly enough, in many of the Gothic cathedrals that over the doorway leading into the cathedral there is a representation of the Vesica Pisces in the carved stonework, so that in fact as you enter the church you are entering into the womb, in a way, of the goddess of earth, as well as into a place where one worships the more often considered masculine deity of God. Fascinating how the balance is always seemingly there. It just gets hidden from view over time. So the Vesica Pisces is also in nature. It is an incredible symbol in the heavens. This was taken by the Hubble telescope. There are a number of nebula who share this overlapping of the circles and creating an eye effect in the center, the hourglass perhaps being the most famous. And we have seen it in the crop circles. This one, a very beautiful and simple vesica that came in August of 1996, to ones that have been more complex. This is a flower of life symbol, one that was going back all the way to the ancient Egyptians, that Drunvalo Melchizedek, among other visionaries of our time, have seen and put together. And look at this extraordinary symbol that you saw in the video from 2003. Another whole interconnected series of vesicas that make this flower of life symbol, again a very ancient and powerful symbol, using the circle and the intersections of the circles to form the sacred geometry of this symbol of life. Now, another aspect of the crop circles, another part of the geometry of crop circles, really had not been explored very much until very recent times with the computer age. This is the fractal. This is a computer-generated image that this particular one comes from the work of Professor Mandelbrot, Benoit Mandelbrot, who was a French mathematician, but he teaches at Cambridge University in Eastern England. And he developed a theory called chaos theory, in which you work with fractions, fractional numbers, and by putting enough of them into the computer, you find that in fact the computer, instead of coming up with just chaotic answers, it will create geometric patterns that are extraordinarily beautiful to the eye, that repeat themselves, and this being the center of it. And what is fascinating and most interesting with fractals, and there are several different fractal patterns, this is perhaps the most famous one, is that they can be taken infinitely smaller, similar to a hologram, and you will find the same characteristics in the smallest part of the fractal as you will if you take them and enlarge them into a very large set. It's fine. They have found that the nature herself works this way as the building blocks of nature. Now, everyone said that this could only be done in a computer, that you could only get these answers out of a computer. Well, they neglected to tell the circle makers that, because in August of 1991, this beautiful Mandelbrot set, very simplified and yet quite gorgeous, appeared not in Wiltshire, but only 4 miles from Professor Mandelbrot's home in an adjacent field. Obviously, the message was getting through. Cambridge is 300 miles from Wiltshire, just to give you a little bit of idea. It's not just around the corner from there. Now, the darker side of this, and I know that you are all familiar with that because so much of the work in ufology has to deal with the darker side of our nature and of perhaps the nature of other intelligent life in our galaxy, in our universe. The darker side is a human story. This apparently triggered a nerve in some Department of Defense ministry, because within 24 hours there were men in uniforms that cordoned off the field and ultimately burned it out so that people could not go in it. And at the same time they drove a tractor through it and other things like this. And it was 2 weeks later that the infamous Doug and Dave, retired artists from the southern part of England, were almost magically, no one really knew how this all got set up. There was no great advance warning, but the world's media was put on alert by powers that be that here's an important announcement. And these two retired artists came out and with some planks and rope and surveying miners' caps and things, said that they had been making all of the crop circles going back to 1978. Ludicrous, actually, on the face of it, but at the time in 1991 the media snapped the story up, and still today you will find in certain subjects that people talk about, they say, oh well, those are created by Doug and Dave, or that's the Doug and Dave phenomenon. That was the beginning of the whole controversy that has come to be known as the hoaxing or the faking controversy of crop circles. It's not my purpose to go into it in great detail, but we'll talk a little bit about it this evening because it is a subject that keeps coming up. But I just wanted you to know the origin. The origin was actually this incredible circle that everyone considered to be impossible. Now, here are some other examples of the extraordinary fractalized crop circles that we have had over the years. This is the double Koch curve that came in 1997 in a place called Milk Hill, which is the center, one of the centers of crop circle country. And we had an even more extraordinary one in 2001. With over 400 circles in a fractalized pattern in a piece of field that is bigger than 2 football fields, over 750 feet in diameter, all occurring in a single night that happened to be one of the worst stormy nights in modern English history. It was like a small hurricane going through the area at the time, with 40, 50, 60 mile an hour winds and rain and significant moisture. And yet, when people discovered the circle on the following day, no footprints were found. There were no muddy trails, leading me to say, and I still stand by this, that regardless of what one can find in terms of, I'll call them human attempted circles, whether they are done by researchers in the open public light, whether they're done for commercial enterprises, or whether they are done as hoaxed formations by people who deceitfully and deceptively go and trespass on farmers' land and ruin part of their fields in the middle of the night. None of these have yet been able to equal this kind of genuine crop circle with the unbelievable complexity, size, coming in a short period of time, in all weathers, overnight essentially in the space of a couple of hours, 3-4 hours, not being detected without lights, and not leaving footprints or any other telltale marks of human intervention into the phenomenon. It's truly, truly extraordinary to me that people continue to want to believe that most crop circles are created by misguided young people who go to pubs and then come out to have a bit of fun in the middle of the night in a field without recognition, certainly without compensation, and always with the threat of being caught and prosecuted. Because since the early 1990s, the British Farmers Union has had a 10,000 British pound fine reward for someone who would be caught in a crop field. In other words, you get a reward for turning somebody in. And believe me, people look in the summertime over there looking to collect that reward. In that period of time of about 12 years, the reward has never been collected, by the way. Now, this is another quite extraordinary crop circle. It's totally unique, as far as I know, in the way it was formed, in the third dimensionality of it. This is the famous face that occurred at a place called Chilbolton in August of 2001, just weeks before the 9/11 tragedy effectively wiped all talk of things like crop circles out of the media. And it is a formation that has really received very little study as a result of that world trauma that took place shortly thereafter. But I still think one of the most exceptional ones that has ever occurred. The way that the crop was woven together, and here we're dealing with quite brittle crop that is really harvestable. This was in mid-August. It was ready to be harvested. It actually occurred 2 days just after that unbelievable fractal that I showed you a moment ago, and only a week before another incredible crop circle, this one which has been called the Chilbolton Message, because it resembles an answer, a possible answer to a message that was sent by American radio telescope from our base at Arecibo in Puerto Rico in the mid-1970s, sent out by people like Carl Sagan and the Cornell research team, the predecessors or parts of the NASA SETI project that grew out of that particular sending. I'm not going to go into it in detail tonight, but one thing that I think is significant is that at the bottom, if you look at it, that as being the top, this being the bottom, at the bottom of the Arecibo message there is this interesting glyph which was to represent pictorially the telescope itself, the reflecting dish that was sending out the radio message to the stars. Well, if you look at this as the bottom of the Chilbolton crop circle that came in 2001, I think it's very interesting because here is obviously the transmission method, and over here you have a picture of a crop circle that came the year before in that same field, the Chilbolton field, from August of 2000. So what is that saying? Are crop circles to be equated to radio signal transmission dishes somehow? Are they transmitting an energy to us? Are they transmitting a signal that perhaps our conscious mind doesn't fully comprehend, but that we then take on a subconscious level, that we take at a different part of our being, that we in a sense take in? One of the researchers who has done very interesting work in crop circles over the years is Lucy Pringle. And Lucy Pringle's work has been more psychological and physiological, and one thing that she has found is that just as the Japanese researcher who took water and was able to show that by you could mentally influence water and that the structure of the water molecules would change over time. In fact, in very little time, if people prayed near the water, or if they were angry near the water, or if they were greedy near the water, that kind of thing, that there would be a difference in the structure. She took vials of pure water and placed them in crop circles and found the same results. That now the human body is 75% water, so obviously we are exposing ourselves to some pretty incredible messages. As I say, if crop circles are a transmission medium, as we're given to believe here in the Chilbolton glyph. So it's very interesting, Lucy Pringle's work. There's a small book by her in which she goes into some of those experiments in the back of the room that we brought from England, that she just published this summer. So it is fascinating how the crop circle phenomenon is multidimensional. And I think it has to be seen that way. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to label all crop circles as being the same thing, or perhaps even having the same identical origins. Many of us have felt in studying this over the years that there are a series of intelligence behind crop circles, and that they perhaps manifest in different circles in different ways. But I do think perhaps they are transmitting something to us, and that we should learn that way from that. Now, where do crop circles occur? Well, Southern England has been the place that has been really the heart of the crop circle phenomenon for the last 25 years. This is the Wiltshire Triangle, the area around Wiltshire. The Stonehenge is right there, and Avebury is right there. It bisects, this is bisected by this ancient line called the St. Michael ley line, or energy line. And this is a line, and you see the circles that are along that line. All of those have churches that are dedicated to St. Michael. So this has been well known over time, that there are energy lines that our forefathers knew about. Why otherwise would they put all these churches to St. Michael, statistically way, way beyond any significance level, that there would be so many churches to St. Michael on that particular energy line. And it runs right through the area where the crop circles come. In the more recent years, this triangle was where perhaps 90% of crop circles in the early days, certainly up through about the mid-1990s, came in that area. Now it's branched out, and there are more down in this area in Hampshire and over to this area along the coast, which is called Sussex. So that we have crop circle groups in all of those areas studying the phenomenon now. But the heart is still in the Wiltshire area, and particularly around the Avebury Stone Circle, just as I pointed out earlier, and how that ties in with the ancient Mayan prophecies. Now, this is a more recent map showing a much smaller area. This is right around Avebury. Here's Avebury right here. Here is the Michael alignment. And they have done, by dowsing, they have shown that the energy of the St. Michael alignment actually is two energies. One is masculine, the Michael energy, and one is feminine. They call it the Mary energy. And that they don't just follow a straight line. They actually curve around that line and come and go and meet each other at various places around that line. And here are all of the main crop circles that have occurred in the years between about 1998 and 2000, 2001. So it's fascinating to see the number of clusters of crop circles. And then you have this interesting area down here, and this is the area where Milk Hill, Alton Barnes, Pewsey Vale, as it's called, is located. And this is another cluster, perhaps on a different energy line that just isn't marked on this map, and it isn't as well known and hasn't been as well studied. There are energy grids all over the Earth's surface, grids that our ancestors knew about, grids that, if you listen to psychics like Edgar Cayce, were used in very ancient times, such as Atlantis, for communication and actually for transportation somehow across the Earth in ways that we cannot yet comprehend today. So you find these energy lines being a very important part of the phenomenon, and that the circles tend to cluster around certain sacred sites and energy sites, many of whom go back into that period of 4,000, 5,000 years ago, which was when the Mayan calendar, this current cycle of the Mayan calendar, back to 3000 BC or so, when it was in fact coming into the early days, when it was being formulated and setting itself up. The same is true in England. Silbury Hill, as was pointed out on the video, is one of the ancient pyramids, one of the few that are still remaining in Europe. No one thinks of England as having pyramids, and yet Silbury Hill is a very good example of a step pyramid, and the timing of its being built is not too far off. It's within 1,000 years of that 3113 BC date. It's about, I believe, 2700 BC in that time period. And it may have replaced an earlier, smaller model, just as we know the ones in Egypt did. Now, looking at the circles, this is a German book by Michael Hesemann, who has done a lot of UFO research as well. This is looking at them from a more scientific point of view, trying to understand the bending of the crop comes at specific places called node points, which are similar to your wrists or your elbows. It's like you bend your arm at a specific place. The same with crop circle crop. The plants bend at specific places. You'll also notice that the seed heads, this is in the control sample in the field, this is in the crop circle wheat, are noticeably smaller. And in some cases, the seeds have all but disappeared, and that means that they didn't germinate. And that's because if the crop circle energy hits the plants in an early stage of their growth, it can short-circuit them from forming much in the way of grain, and many of the grain heads will be non-existent, basically. But if it comes at a slightly later period, it can actually potentize the grain. Now, here we have the same thing shown up here, the crop circle wheat within the circle, and then in the control, the different types of bending at the nodal points. And as was pointed out in the video, in the cell walls, the actual puncturing through of energy, basically water vapor, showing that heat source has been applied in a very, very short bursted manner, such that, in fact, something like 80% of the stalks of wheat in genuine crop circles are not killed when the energy hits the circle and bends the plants over at the node points. The plants bend, but they are not broken. It's only when people walk on them, basically, that they get broken in most cases. So the circles respect life. They follow a principle of respect for life. Here is an example of the magic bend with researcher Nick Nicholson. This is in canola oil, or rapeseed as it's called in England. Notoriously a difficult crop to walk in because it's so brittle and will snap and also be very messy because, of course, oil eventually comes from the pods that come from those flowers. The plant has been bent over in an early stage by a crop circle happening, and then because no one walked on it over some weeks, it has bent back up toward the sun in that magic bend. And you find this time and time again in the crop circle phenomenon. I mentioned that if the crop circle energy is applied to the crop at the right timing, it will potentize the wheat or the crop. Guess which side is from crop circle wheat? This was planted in shade by Canadian researcher Chad Dietken, who got this wheat from circles in Alberta in his country, and you see this is the crop circle wheat, this is the normal wheat growing in the same conditions. Research with Nancy Talbot and William Levengood, the BLT research team, has shown over and over again that the germination is statistically much more potent in the crop circle wheat. And again, I stress, if the circle energy is applied at the right time. If it comes too early, it can actually more or less stop the process of germination. But if it comes a little bit later, you get wheat that is significantly stronger, healthier, and grows higher. Now, another American guy who's not really a scientific researcher, he's a farmer. His name is Steve, and he came to our first Signs of Destiny conference back in 2002, and he has been doing a project that's been very fascinating because he got some crop circle grain in the mid-1990s, and every year he has been planting the grain and then planting the seeds from the grain and harvesting the rest of the field, but replanting time and time again. And now he's on to the 7th or 8th generation, and he's found that the protein levels in the flour are 20 to 30% higher, for example, than they are in the rest of the normal wheat that he grows in his fields around it. What my question would be is, why aren't they saving this wheat? Why aren't they replanting this grain? Why aren't we, instead of bothering with this genetic manipulation, which I think many of us understand and intuitively realize is very damaging and will be very dangerous for our planet and for our population, why aren't we doing it the way the crop circles have been showing us? People often ask me what is the message of crop circles, and I have to say, you look at when they have come. The phenomenon has blossomed in modern time exactly at the same time that the genetic and cloning experiences and experiments have been taking place. And where has been the heart of those experiments? It's been in England and Scotland. It's in Britain and the British Isles. So you have to think about that. Are we not being given a message about the very food chain that we depend on for our lives? Another sign of the genuine crop circles is this. They're called the blown nodes. Here's those nodes magnified in a photo by Bert Jansen, a Dutch researcher who helped with that video and who's also going to speak at our Signs of Destiny 2004. These are showing again the force that opens up the cavity in the plant stalk when the water vapor is released by that high heat burst that has been shown time and time again to be the physical source of the crop circle energy that then bends the plants down without killing them. Another part of that is the soil. We're now finding that the soil becomes temporarily magnetized, and as it does, the heat actually fuses the iron oxide onto the little rocks and pieces of chalk in some of the circles. You see it's a small rock collected. The soil is quite chalky, and it's a specific kind of soil. Not all crop circles come on chalky soil, by the way. Not all crop circles show iron magnetized to rocks. There's never 100% correspondence, but over the years of experimentation, we are coming closer and closer to understanding that there is some sort of ionized energy. Nancy Talbot calls it the ionized plasma vortex theory, that is actually in some way beamed down, coming down from above the earth, from through the atmosphere, similar to a lightning strike, only invisible and in such a short duration that it does not kill the plant. Here, very interestingly enough, and you see the date of this is last summer, a year ago, from Ohio in a soybean field. We have what happened in the crop circle. The plants showed this charring at the base of the plants, whereas control soy plants don't. Very interesting, showing there's a high heat aspect to this phenomenon. Some of the wheat plants actually show charring at the very near to the ground level, at the root level, almost like where the energy charges, it goes down into the ground and leaves a signature at that point as well. Magnetizing. There is a magnetic influence that happens. This is a magnet that was showing the soil being changed and being magnetized. So there are influences on the soil as well, and that's some of the newest research that's just been done in the last couple of years, showing the amount of soil change and microscopic change, not only to the seed heads but also to the soil inside the formations, and nothing corresponding to that outside the formations. This is an interesting crop circle from the year 1999. It was called the Three Dolphins or the Three Crescents. And it was interesting for a couple of reasons. You heard the mention of ghosts. Well, this one had a ghost, an important ghost to it. I'm not sure that I can agree with Farmer Tim Carson that the ghosts are caused by slugs eating the excess grain that is somehow pounded into the field in the crop circle formation. And the reason I can't agree with him is that, first of all, well over 50, usually 100 or so crop circles occur in England each summer and have for the last 15 years. And the ghost formations have always been few and far between. There are no more than 3 or 4 in any one season. This last year there was only really 1 or 2 of any significance. And if the slugs were responsible, why would they choose only 1 or 2 formations and ignore the other 40 or so, or 50 or 60 that had occurred? But what's also interesting, and what isn't explained by the slug eating theory, is not only did this happen, but that this field was replanted when this ghost appeared, and Bert Janssen, the Dutch researcher, went into the field, and what he did was take plant samples. Well, guess which of the new crop was planted in the soil that is the ghost? You see the difference? A good 20% increase in plant growth. That's what's causing the difference, that they look different. It's not just that there is this idea that somehow animals or slugs have eaten and the crop and therefore they're growing differently, that maybe more fertilizer, I don't know. But no. Fields are heavily fertilized anyway. This is something has changed in the soil, and therefore it is leading to higher and better crop, and this is making the difference that is creating these ghosts. This was a formation from 2003 that you saw on the video. It was a particularly beautiful one and meaningful in that, if you will count, this is a 13-pointed star. Many of you know that 13 is a very special number, not only in the Mayan calendar, but also in sacred geometry. And Michael Glickman, a researcher in England, had actually been predicting that 2002 or 2003 would see some formations that exhibited what he calls 13-level geometry, meaning the geometry of 13s. It's not easy to divide a circle into 13 parts, let alone do this in the middle of the night without lights and in all weathers, etc., etc. Well, this was an absolutely perfect and beautiful circle, some beautiful weaving in the centers here, and this little amazing ring on the outside, which I'll talk about in another minute. But what's interesting from our point of view is that looking at the 2004 season, where I want to start now, having given you some background into the phenomenon, we find that the very first crop circle of 2004 was in fact a ghost of 2003. In the middle of April, when people in England were starting to go out and look for crop circles, some of the researchers saw the field, and they saw this in the field in a oilseed rape. It's the rapeseed again, not the same crop as last year, by the way. This is in wheat, completely different crop. Here we are in oilseed rape, and you see the correspondence. And they actually, a couple of them went into the field to check, and it was not till they got there that they realized that they were looking at a ghost formation. So I do think there is more to the ghost formation experience than just slugs eating away at grain that's sat in a field. Now, another one in the rapeseed this year, and it was not until the early part of May that the researchers' patience was rewarded by the first crop circle of 2004. You can imagine that every spring there is always a bit of a feeling, are they going to come again? You know, are we going to be visited again? Is the magic going to continue? So far we have always been greeted with beautiful ones, and this is quite a complex one for rape, and you will notice the rapeseed, and you still notice the Vesica, type of Vesica Pisces here, this beautiful scrolling. Some people have said that if you look at it, this is like a swami. I don't know. That you could look for many different possibilities in it. That is Celtic scrolling, by the way. It's from ancient Celtic motifs, we believe. Then a few days later, a double spiral, a very simple spiral, but a one that is in the form of our Milky Way galaxy, a spiral galaxy form, appeared again in a rapeseed field. We're talking now about the 9th or 10th of May. Then this one. This was the first crop circle in Wiltshire, and fascinatingly enough, and I don't know why, it was probably one of the most ignored formations. I think it's because it's not very big. You can see now in between the tractor lines there's an average of 65 feet in most fields across Wiltshire in England. So you can kind of get a rule of thumb that that's about 65 feet. You see it's not much bigger than 65, 70 feet. There are actually 3 circles here. kind of a ringed one, and then another one here and another one here. This occurred the 25th of May in a field near what is called the White Horse of Pusey. People have made these white horse monuments there. Actually, they take the soil, topsoil off, and the chalk appears looking white, and then they put more chalk, white chalk on it. In the villages do this, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years. Some of them go back even to thousands of years old, and I believe that they were ancient dragon symbols that were later turned into the horse. Probably no accident that St. George on the horse slew the dragon. You see, the horse then replaced the dragon. Anyway, this very beautiful set of circles in a new barley was never walked in, so that 2 months later, when some other formations came in the field, and if you walked on the correct tractor line or tram line, you actually walked through that formation and you realized that not 1, not 2, not 10, but hundreds, 90% of the stems had the magic bend. They bent over at the base and then they had all turned back up to the sun, so that it was still alive and it was ripening into grain. So that is a very early one, and I thank Busty Taylor for it because he's one of the few photographers that have got a picture of it. Continuing on, we're now about the 26th or 27th of May, and this one took place near Brighton in Hampshire, in Sussex, I'm sorry, in the south of England, further south than Wiltshire. It's in early barley, so it's very green. You'll notice the colors will change as we go through the summer because, of course, the grain ripens. And the crop will change from the rapeseed, which is the earliest crop, to the barley, and ultimately to the wheat. Those are the three crops that crop circles tend to appear in. Then this very beautiful one in early wheat. This was the first really major formation in Wiltshire. It came on the 30th of May and was a Celtic scroll. Unfortunately, the farmer didn't like the idea of people going into his field, so he took and cut boxes out of this areas the next day. So afterward, it did achieve his purpose. People tended to leave the field alone. Luckily, a few photographers were able to get up on the very first day and get some nice pictures for us, because I think it's a meaningful formation with the triple scrolling here and the spiraling. Now, talking of spirals, June 10th, the first formation in June, a major formation came in Hampshire with this double scrolling, double spiraling, which is actually very close to ancient Neolithic rock art that has been found at Newgrange in Ireland. So if you visited Ireland and you think this looks like the spirals at Newgrange, you are right. It's very, very close to the spirals that had occurred there. A couple of what they call grape shots over here, little circles that appear outside of the rest of the formation. In fact, I guess there's a series of them that are part of the formation. Then this one. We're in the early part of June now. Some said this looked like a trident. It has fractalized. These small circles are called fractal circles. They come out in specific geometric relationships to the larger ones. And there's an interesting energy down here. This is something of sort of a stylized form of a later crop circle of the summer. This was in southern England, also near to Brighton and in Tegdown Hill. Then June 20th, the night of the summer solstice. You notice this energy here? Look and see the next one. Some of the same elements. This one was called the trumpet, Gabriel's horn. Other names, but that was the one that was most used for it. Looks very much like a trumpet playing. It occurred in the field called Eastfield, where there have been crop circles every year since the late 1980s. A very significant field owned by Tim Carson, the farmer that was in the video. This was one of the first formations that Callista and I visited, and certainly one of the strongest in terms of the energies that we felt there and that the people we were with felt there. We had a clairvoyant with us who said that it was actually music being played that our ears could not yet hear. Now, what's interesting on this one also is that the night before this came, a group of researchers went up on a hill and they were doing an ancient Hindu ceremony where they chanted the same chant over and over and over and over for 12 hours. Different people coming and going, but the chant was always going, and it was going over that field in exactly the direction of the circle. And then the following morning, this came. Quite large too. 1, 2, 3, over 3 tractor lines, so that's what, 180 feet or more. Then this one occurred the next night, June 21st. Strange formation, one that very few people visited because it was several miles from the nearest road, but a number of people did fly over it. I don't know more about it other than it was in young wheat. We're now starting to get into the green wheat time by the middle of June. The solstice, this came the night after the solstice, 21st of June. Then the second great formation in Wiltshire that occurred on June 26th, which was called the Bee, but it's really not a bee. It was below the Alton Barnes White Horse, which is another one of the Wiltshire White Horses. And quite a long, when you see the first circle is all the way up there, and it goes quite a ways down along the tram line or tractor line. The wings are actually the reverse of the way that they would be with an insect, in the opposite way. And some people felt that this was actually a stylized caduceus form, or the double snakes, with the wing staff of Mercury. Some of the research they did sampling from this, and I understand it showed significant microscopic change in the crop circles. Again, a picture of it. June 30th, Rabley Wood. Quite an interesting set of 3 or 4 different formations here. Very simple and yet still very beautiful. This was a rather isolated field as well. Not too many people went in it. Now we're in July. A simple formation that came on the 4th of July in Hampshire. It was not too well visited that I know of, but I think Andrew King got this picture. There are many, many different photographers that we rely on for the pictures, and I thank them all, because without their really ceaseless effort and expense, all at their own expense of going up in helicopters and airplanes, we wouldn't have these great, great pictures. Then this one, 4th of July or 7th of July at the Combe Abbey near Coventry. On the Abbey grounds, actually. Sort of an eye symbol. And apparently what is fascinating is that something very similar to this symbol, at least the inner part of the symbol with the vesicas here, and this Vesica Piscis center, is actually in one of the books of the ancient cathedral, or abbey I should say, on which this appeared. Here's another grape shot, completely independent from any tractor lines, no entry lines. Now we're on I believe it's the 10th of July, and this is at Pegston. It's 120 feet long in wheat. Fractalized circles here coming down at the ends. Again, I don't know too many people who went in this because it's a fair drive from Wiltshire, but a very fascinating formation and quite a long one, as you can see. Then this one, the Jester's Cap, the 14th of July. Suddenly we had the 11th of July. We had a series of formations that had been very slow, as you can see, in early June, and not too many formations this year, and early July. And then about the 14th, 15th of July, it suddenly picked up, and we had more come. This is next to the historic Woodbridge Pub. Very interesting one. Again, a very beautiful, sort of a trifoil circle. And what's fascinating is this one actually had an animal that they found trapped in the circle. And it just shows that the circles can be a very high level of energy and rather dangerous. It's amazing we don't find more animals. Mostly animals apparently run away. They shy from the energy as it comes to and down into the circle. But this was a little hedgehog porcupine animal. And they don't run, they hunker down. And it said that it was completely bloodless and flat as a pancake. And you can see how it was swirled like the wheat. So very unusual to see a dead animal in a crop circle, but this was one from this summer that occurred right there in the middle of Wiltshire. The same day, the 13th of July, this beautiful sun-moon formation occurred opposite the ancient burial of West Kennet Long Barrow. The West Kennet Long Barrow is just up there, not more than another 50 feet from this circle. This circle had lots of very beautiful centers, quite amazingly laid down, and it had a very high magnetic energy. I had a compass, and the compass wouldn't stay still when we were standing in it. It was moving. You couldn't get a reading of north from it. Then I think this was the same night, in fact, as the one at West Kent at Long Barrow. This one at Maidstone occurred, looking very much like an atom, or a symbol of the atom. A hexagram, obviously, in 6, divided up into 6s in wheat. And the wheat is starting to mature. You can see it's starting to get gold. The next night, the 15th, this simple set of 3 circles, and yet research that was done in them showed that there was significant blown nodes, and the elongation of the nodal points, the stems, were longer, all of which are aspects of genuine crop circles, were found in these rather simple circles just outside of Avebury on a hillside. Then that same night, the 15th of July, these circles at what's called the Rollright Stones, which is an ancient monument that's north of Wiltshire near Oxford. And as far as I know, Lucy Pringle was the only photographer to get this picture. One of the interesting things, though, is I was told that this circle was exactly the same circumference, in other words, the same size as the circle that I showed you of that 13-pointed star that had created the ghost, the one from last year. So it was exactly, they said you could have put one right down on top of the other. Another formation that occurred the 17th of July in Southfield, and I don't know, many people felt that this was rather amateurish and possibly could have been the work of hoaxers. I don't personally know, one way or the other. You see, though, it's not as precise, and the crescenting isn't as good as in the earlier ones, which are absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. Then this one, the 17th of July. An amazing, almost 800 feet long, if you went all the way down there. And this whole series of circles, they were totally independent until people started to walk in them. And each one alternated between going clockwise and counterclockwise. Truly an amazing feat. My wife dubbed this one the Dune worms, the sandworms of Dune. If you've read Dune, you understand. Here's another picture of it. This is a well-known spot, Windmill Hill, just outside of Avebury, where there have been crop circles in this field for several years now. And this is one of the most spectacular of them. Then this one. This is an interesting one. It occurred on the 20th of July in the same field as that one I mentioned to you back in May. And so the field had not been harvested, and it's very interesting. It's a small one, not too big. You see, it only goes about 2 tram lines and a little more. They called it the axis mundi because it's the idea of the world axis, the 4 directions around which the world turns. And it came the very night after the farmer and his wife had had a friendly evening with some crop circle researchers from Norway who had been studying their field in some other formations a few years before, and who'd come back to England to see what might happen. And the very next morning they were rewarded with this beautiful circle. As far as I know, no one knew about that private dinner party, and so I don't think it was something that would have been hoaxed. This is something that just occurred, and in a way shows the interaction that takes place in this phenomenon between people and the circles forming. Then, 2 days later, on the 22nd of July, this really quite incredible, and again quite long, it's over 600 feet, chakra system, 7 chakras occurred. And there was controversy about this because it looks a little kitschy with that heart being the heart chakra and the crown for the crown chakra. I personally don't know. I liked the energy in some of them better than the others. I was more taken with the ones here than the ones up here. But when you see it, the ground lay was quite good, and people were very impressed with some of that. And then when you see the field, you see the oldest formation, the second formation, and you understand why some of the farmers get upset. And that's in just one summer, one season. That's a good deal of his field. This is a simple little formation next to the pyramid of Silbury Hill. It's a good shot of Silbury Hill. Came on the 22nd also of July. And it's an example, but I don't have the other picture, but I didn't make a slide of it, but I do have it. There is a picture that shows just two circles with a extended line, and these little ones up here. Then somebody, and probably people, did come and make this later. But this was genuine, this part, and these right out in the middle of the field. Now we're at the 21st of July in a very interesting formation because it was created by two Germans who are doing a research project. Their names are Koch and Kyborg, and they've been doing this research project over a number of years. And they announced it, and they paid the farmer, and yet you can see it's pretty good work. Now they did it in the daytime. They took a number of hours. In fact, it took 2 days to do. But it does show that it is possible for humans to do not too bad a job, seen from the air. That happens to be me and my wife sitting there the day the helicopter flew over. And then this one, quite extraordinary. This one took place on the 25th of July, which was the weekend that the Glastonbury Crop Circle Convention was going on. And what's fascinating is to see this is a 7-star, 11-star, 13-star. And again, the outer circle matched the outer circle of the 13 diamond star of the year before. Very, very beautiful formation, and some people actually had anomalies take place in this formation, cameras that stopped batteries, decharged, and magnetic phenomena. Then this one, the same night, I believe it was the 25th, no, the 26th, the same night taking place, this scrolling, the Celtic scrolls at Avebury. And then this quite interesting phenomenon, formation, on the 26th of July, which is the day of the Mayan New Year. And what we know is that this was quite a credible looking formation, but one of the researchers, a man named Bear Cloud, a Native American artist, happened to have had a very powerful experience on this same date the year before. So he felt called by spirit, and he follows spirit quite well, to get up in the middle of the night and go to the field here at 4:30 in the morning. And his testimony is pretty damning. He says that he saw a group of men coming out of the field all dressed in black, and that they were carrying boards. Now they wouldn't be surfing, to my knowledge, in a wheat field at 4:30 in the morning. And the other thing, even though the lay was pretty good on this, and it's pretty sharp, we did go in it to see, this is not an original design. And to me, one of the hallmarks of genuine crop circles is their originality. This dolphin design came 2 years ago in 2002, and these sort of propellers came back in 1999, and this was just putting them together. Now, that's okay. We don't know for sure whether this was hoaxed or not. All we can say is that a researcher saw people looking as if they might have been dressed to be in the field, coming out of that field early in the morning, and then he stayed around and waited until the sun came fully up and found the formation and went in it, and he felt that he saw marks of people having been in there. But what to me is interesting is this, and this hasn't been very well reported. 2 nights later, this occurred. No hoaxers were found. Now, we don't have 2 dolphins, we have 3 or 4 or more leaping. It's almost like maybe we're getting an answer. Again, the interaction that takes place in this phenomenon is truly amazing. 3 dolphins coming. Now, a couple of days after that, this very unusual one, which is still the subject of controversy. I've been told, no, it was done by people. I've been told, no, it was not done by people. But all I can go is by the feeling that my wife and I had when we were in it, which was one of great beauty, and almost surprise. As you're walking down these lanes, all of a sudden you come to an ending point. And people had been making connections between them. But when it was totally new, you could see that they didn't connect. It's a sort of a disjointed square of 3s, 3s, 3s. Here it is, a little closer up. This was in an isolated field near the forest outside of Marlborough, called the Savernake Forest. And finally this, quite amazing, a real maze of a circle, and all straight lines except for the circle that was at the very far outside. Now we need the second tray. Should I advance it? Kind of has to, that tray is a little bit finicky. No. It will sit down and you have to get it exactly in the groove. No. Need a light?
I got lights.
No, they don't need a light, just...
Is it the same tray, Chet?
What?
Is it the same tray as the other tray?
No, but it fits the same projectors, and I've used it all the time, so I know it. You do have to kind of get it right on target. Oh, shoot. There we are. Good. Okay, thank you. Now we're at Tan Hill. This is the end of July. And what is interesting about this formation is that this formation actually occurred, whoops, there, it got in backward. This formation occurred over the period of 4 nights, which to me is a pretty clear sign that we are not dealing with a genuine phenomenon, because when a formation occurs, typically it takes minutes for complex formations to come down and appear in the fields. This one took 4 different nights, and a series of a team of Swiss researchers, they said that they saw people in the fields 2 of those nights. And here it is, the way it finally looked. So I don't know. It does show that if that is the case, that we can get some fairly sophisticated circles being done. Now, this one, right in the middle of that time, the 29th of July, was one that unfortunately the farmer cut out of the field the day it appeared. So there are very few pictures of it. This was by I think it was a Belgian tourist got this picture, and it's the only one that I know of. A very beautiful little serpentine formation. Almost every year we have had a serpentine formation of some kind or another in the crop circle phenomenon, going all the way back to the early 1990s. The serpent, of course, being one of the ancient symbols of wisdom of the ancient cultures. Here is a photo from a pole looking, and it's quite a little one. It wasn't a big one, but it was, for those that saw it, they said it was quite beautiful, those that got in it the very first day. And again, you have the circles right in the center, like this, not touching the tractor lines at all. Then this one, this is a theme that has come back again and again over the years. This one occurred the 30th of July down in Hampshire. 3-fold crop circle theme, and again several of the smaller circles in wheat. We're all in wheat now. This was perhaps the next most beautiful one. Some felt it was a very, very significant one, a maze type of formation, actually a labyrinth, because there was a way in and then you walked that way back out. You walked in each one of those and walked back out again. Except for the tram lines, they never broke those lines. It's the 8-pointed star, of course, which is the ancient goddess symbol. And it came very close to that sun-moon one at the at the West Kennet Long Barrow, or ancient burial site. It occurred on the 30th of July. 2 days later, the 1st of August, This occurred down in Hampshire again, not much visited, but it was a beautiful infinity figure. And these two interesting tufts left in the middle of the infinity, almost like a signature. We've seen this before. There have been these two tufts, and they may be one of the certain intelligences that just gives a little signature to us so we can put them together. Then this one. Now this isn't a very good picture, and I apologize, but it's the only one I've been able to get. This one was August the 2nd, and it was at Silbury Hill, and it's really, frankly, quite big, but not terribly impressive. And the reason I show it to you is because the next day, that's what happened. From that to that. I wish I could believe that the crop circle makers had to take 48 hours to create this beautiful design, but I don't believe they would. Nonetheless, it is beautiful Mayan symbolism. This symbol means the ancient ones, or the Milky Way, and there are some significant numerical symbolisms again relating to the Mayan calendar. Since our theme this year in our Crop Circle Conference is about the Mayan calendar, it certainly would have been wonderful if I thought that the genuine circle makers were bringing us a Mayan theme this summer, but I suspect that it was a little bit of, they had some human help in giving us the idea. Still, it's quite a beautiful formation. One of the reasons I also have to tell you that I'm skeptical of this is because I was there on the very first day when it looked like this. And not only did it look very simple when we were in it that afternoon, that we were the ones who basically discovered it. We were flying over in a small helicopter that morning, and no one had seen it, and no one knew it was there, and then we sort of announced it to people. But when we walked in one of the side lines, we found these markers at the edge of the field. And they were phosphorescent, so you could see them a little bit in the dark without showing light. And they're pretty clearly marking, you know, which line was to go where. And this picture was taken by Andreas Müller, the German researcher, and I got it from him. But he and I were there at the same time. We had told him where it was, and then we joined them there in the circle, and we were both appalled to find these. So it was a bit of a calling card, I have to admit. But those show that the whole phenomenon has to be looked at very carefully and with a critical eye. Now, near the beginning of the end of the season, I should say, the early part of August, this triangle one came, quite simple and yet quite beautiful. Then from there, another one that I don't know, this could have been also made by people, but again, it has some very beautiful lines to it, and of course the spider looking, although they're not actually 8 legs, it's a sort of insect design on the 5th of August. Then this one, which it came in a place we don't get very many crop circles, the northeast part of Wiltshire, at a place called Aldbourne. And what is fascinating with it is you see where these pieces are missing. Well, again, one of the researchers who's a geometer has taken and shown how those pieces that are missing in fact create a square around the circle around the square, and that they just exactly match. So that if you didn't have those missing pieces, you wouldn't be able to have the square filled in. And this is typical of real, genuine crop circle design. It's very inventive. It's showing mathematical formulas that oftentimes people wouldn't know exist, and in a very elegant way. The 7th of August, next to the Wilton Windmill, in an area that hadn't had crop circles before, this one occurred. And then this one, a quite beautiful, very magnetic looking circle on the 8th of August, which was the next to the last one of the season. The last one in Wiltshire, in the main area where crop circles occur. And the final one, there's the lay. I thought that was so extraordinary to show you. Again, this is not, I don't believe, something that the fakers can do. It is amazing how the genuine article gets these very, very sculpted look to the lay inside the circles. The other ones are usually very messy. And then finally this one, a serpent or a dragon design outside of Oxford. at the 14th of August. So that was the main crop circles in England of 2004. But before we close, I want to show you just a few from some other places around the world so that you get an idea. This phenomenon is not just a British one, although the heart is still very much in England. This is an anomaly that I actually took. This is, you see there's a place missing here. Well, I got a picture of that plasma vortex. And this was back in the year 2000, and it's still one of the best pictures. You actually see the vortex swirling, and that pink is not a thumb, it's part of the vortex. This is a crystal skull that I was using at that time. Because crystal skulls help to magnify energy, you can oftentimes sense energy fields when you use them. So I sometimes take them into the crop circles to sort of get a feel of where, and it definitely guided me to take the picture right at this point and get the energy formation. Here's another circle in which we got an anomaly in 2001. The photograph was just whited out, although the frames before and after were all perfectly good. Another anomaly was this year. One of the people in our crop circle group took this picture in that, this was that 7, 11, 13 quilt looking one, or star. This is a ball of light. One of the orbs. People are getting more and more of these orbs today. And here's one in the 2004 crop circle. Here's another energy phenomenon of orbs with our group, the group that was in the video. You'll recognize some of the people. Look at the orbs over some of us in one of the circles from 2003. Here are orbs. And this was in a crop circle in maize, in corn, in Indiana, in the United States about 2 years ago, taken at night. Look at the, just orbs, energy orbs. So there's a definite energy vibration taking place in certain of the circles. A little different, these were shafts of energy that were coming over the crystal skulls that we were using in the circle in barley. This was in 2001. So I've got some pictures to show some of the energy. There's other people that have them too. Now, the reason I'm showing this one, this is from America. This is from America last year, and it was lined up with an ancient burial mound in Ohio. Directly lined up. And this whole area of Ohio now is turning into a hot spot for crop circles in the last 3 years. And Jeffrey Wilson is going to speak on that. He lives in Ohio now, and he's going to tell the American crop circle story at our conference. This is the ancient serpent mound. Some of you may have seen it. It's quite a very big monument there in southern Ohio. And last year, this crop circle with a serpent's eye occurred just a mile from the serpent mound. In soybeans. This is the one where they did showing the charring, the base leaf that I showed you a little earlier. Now a new one occurred this year and in another part of Ohio, about 100 miles away. And interestingly enough, it also was adjacent to an ancient mound. And if you did do the geometry, look how it lines up with the one from the year before. The one from the year before is in red, the current one is in black. Almost identical. I mean, overlaps that, again, unless you were a geometer, you could never get them that perfect. Here is Jeffrey Wilson, the fellow who's going to come in November, and he is showing in a cornfield. This is a cornfield. Now this was not in a crop circle form. It was laid down with very unusual patterns. The lay of the corn though was over each other, and it didn't form a real pretty pattern, but it had all of the scientific characteristics of a crop circle. So the energy that forms crop circles laid this down in a sort of a zigzaggy pattern across this cornfield. Again, very adjacent to one of these ancient burial mounds, and showing the corn seeds. This is inside the circle, this is outside the circle. So you see the difference, how they're shrunken and desiccated, just as the wheat kernels are in the ones in England. So you see this happens in many different mediums, not just in the traditional crops of England, also here in the States we're getting these. And more are coming in America. You remember I said that in that video clip, that as interest got higher in America, more circles and more intriguing and interesting ones would come. Well, that's exactly what's starting to happen. This is in Arkansas in May of this year. A beautiful 7-pointed star, quite different than the ones you've seen in England, and yet very complex in its own right. And look at the lay inside the circle, the wheat laying over. Very, very well done. I mean, amazingly concise, precise. And this one also had a very interesting phenomenon in that a bird's nest, no bird, but a bird's nest was found. Absolutely embedded in the wheat and completely downed, and it was also flattened entirely like a pancake with the crop. If this had been done with boards or mechanically, it would have been stomped on and it would have, been splintered. Totally intact. Here's one in Utah in June of this year. I don't know what the symbol might mean, but it's quite a complex formation. Not just a simple circle, obviously. So we're getting more and more here in the States. And here was one in California, up at Solano County, near Travis Air Force Base, which I used to work at. And this is the second or third year now they've had really fairly complex formations taking place there. But the farmer this year was so put off by the publicity from last year that he kept it entirely secret until he had harvested the field. But he did allow someone to go and get some aerial pictures. Here's in Minnesota in July, a crescent-shaped set of crop circles. And now in Canada, 13, actually it should now be 14. Another one came after this map was made, but showing in the various parts of Canada where they were, and then these are the designs. It's very difficult to get pictures from some of the other countries, so I got the designs and I just put them there to show you. Quite an interesting set. Some simple circles, some quite complex patterning taking place. This one was in poplar trees, saplings of poplar trees, like 30 feet tall. In Germany, there were about a dozen crop circles, a little more than a dozen that were considered to be genuine crop circles this summer, starting in May and going through till the end of August. Here's a couple of young men in the crop circle, the farmer's son and his friend. And these show some of the places where they were. I grouped them by the German state in which they occurred, different parts of Germany. You notice over here on the map, a lot of them are in the central part of Germany. In Holland, there were 11 circles that were considered to be genuine circles this summer. Bert Jansen of Holland will come in November to Arizona to speak at the Signs of Destiny. But again, you get some very unusual shapes, quite different shapes. And some more similar ones, more ones like we have seen. This, the same symbol as I was showing you at the beginning of my talk, the circle around the equal armed cross. And finally in the Czech Republic, 14 circles came. Again, some of them quite unique, quite different energies. Some of them looking similar to crop circles as they were in England back in the 1980s and early 1990s. It's almost like, again, a progression of experiences going on, and the phenomenon seems to be moving out from England into other parts of Europe and parts of the world. This is in Poland. I have a couple of pictures from ones that I think there were 9 in Poland this year. Nancy Talbot was in Poland last summer, did research on several of the ones there last summer, and she said that a number of them exhibited the characteristics that they can tell the microscopic changes that can't be made just by hoaxing or mechanical means. These are all Polish crop circles from 2004. Look at that. It's really amazing whole field of crop circles. It's very unusual to see that many in any country except in England. And this are in Italy. Here is a place near Turin in June. They had 14 crop circles this summer in Italy. Here's a ground or a pole shot of one that was a triangle type crop circle with a long stem, right opposite the ancient Roman baths of the city of Alessandria. And the UFO Italia organization was taking these. Somebody was doing measurements in them. You can see it's a barley crop, I believe. Another quite a beautiful crescent one. These are all Italian, various parts of Italy. And this one is near the French border and actually came on the farm of some friends of mine. And I happened to get to meet them and we talked about it. We didn't go over to find it. It was already harvested. But very unusual. This is the shape of it. Very unusual design. Again, the originality that we see in the crop circle phenomenon is always astounding. Here's a snow circle in Norway. They don't just come in crops. No one knows what this was. You see, these are animal tracks, and this man just came across it when he was cross-country walking in April. This is the only one that I've found in Russia, but there have been reports of crop circles in Russia for several years, and this year there was a photograph in one of the local papers. In Spain, quite a beautiful spiral taken from a high hillside. In Switzerland, this is also in this summer, a good complex one, and it's interesting, this was in a village that is about 10 miles from Billy Meyer's village. You know Billy Meyer case, of course, and the Pleiadians near Zurich, in the countryside outside of Zurich. Switzerland has had several crop circles over the last 4 or 5 years, 2, 3, 4 each year now. I think there were 3 in the summer. I talk about it in my newsletter. I give kind of a report on it. And finally, this is one from 1991. Maybe you'd be able to read this. This is a script that occurred at Milk Hill, where after an American had gone out and made a message publicly that asked, "Speak to us," this glyph came back. And they did linguistic analysis of it based on these being symbols, even though they're of no known alphabet. And what they found was in all of the ancient and modern languages that they were able to connect it up to, only one made any sense based on those as symbols, and that was this. This is Latin. And what it says, it's in the plural, it says, "We oppose hoaxes. We oppose deception." So you see, I think we're getting the message loud and clear all the way back from 1991, but it's up for you and me and everyone to understand that message, to take that message, and then to act on that message, and hopefully to learn some of what the circle makers are attempting to communicate to us, whether it is to our conscious mind, whether it is to our physical body vibration, whether it is to our subconscious mind. The question is still out. It may be to all of that part of us, because we are unique and unified beings. And perhaps they are trying to tell us that the same is true in the rest of our extraordinary universe that we live in. And hopefully we will get a message, if it is a warning, before it is too late, to have completely ruined our food chain and led us down a very bad path that we do seem, unfortunately, to be trying to trod at the moment. So I just want to leave you with that message. I think it is one of hope. I think it is one for the future. Yes, we oppose deception. Come together and learn in a positive and honest and open way. And with that, I'm going to leave you. I have a couple of questions. There's time for just a couple of questions, but I know it's getting pretty late. So we can have the lights come up, and then I will take just a couple of questions before we will call the night. Thank you very much.
I can't help but note that these things seem to happen in Anglo societies, and I'm wondering, do they happen in China? Do they happen in Africa? Do they happen in Native American land?
That is a good question. It's not in Anglo societies. The Italians, the Swiss, the Poles.
Caucasian.
I think the Czechs. All of them would yes, Caucasian possibly. They might have a point of difference with you on some of that. What you have to realize is, who grows the grain for the world? The truth is that over 80% of the grains that are typical of the crop circle grains are grown in the countries that we're talking about. I don't have very much from Australia, although the phenomenon does exist in Australia. I do know it also has existed in Japan in rice paddies, certainly an Asian society. There have been reports of them in India, but I've never seen photographs, and I get very leery of unsubstantiated, undocumented reports. The problems with Africa is there's not much grain grown in the sub-Saharan Africa. We actually give them that grain, all that they're eating. And I don't know, I've not have heard of any in that particular continent. That's the one continent I've never heard a report from. I think I've heard from all the other continents. South America, definitely Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Australia, as I mentioned to you, Japan. China is a big question mark, but the truth is if they were occurring in China, unless there were so many of them it could not be ignored, I suspect it would be the similar situation that what happened in France. In France there were some in the mid-1990s, but they came close to very sensitive nuclear facilities, and the French government shut down all reporting of them, and after one time they never came back. So you see they interact, there's an interaction going on. So it was like, nope, we're not going to, talk to them, nobody's going to see them, nobody's going to be in them, and the Chinese would, I suspect, do the same thing. So that's where we are. Good. Yes, Tamar.
Yeah, hi, Chet. What the Major Ed Dames had said something about these were indicating places that we'd be safe during Earth changes. Did you hear that on Art Bell a few weeks ago?
I didn't hear that, but I have to tell you, many of you know who Ed Dames is, that he said many different things over the years about crop circle, and I have never found any of them to be really credible. He told me that they were alien markers that had nothing to do with humans one year, and that they were simply time markers so that they could know if they were traveling across time-space, that this was a nice place to visit in that year. You look for the triple rounds and therefore you would come here. Well, that didn't make any sense to me back in about 1993, so it still doesn't make any sense that these would be, quote, safe places. No, I don't think England is necessarily a very safe place or an unsafe place. And in America, as I pointed out to you, they've come all across the United States. So I have to recuse that part of remote viewing. I think that no, there are other explanations. Yes, sir.
Yes, were there any UFO abductions connected to those crop circles involving those reptilian greys and those insectoid duros or demonic robots?
No, I've never heard of the crop circles being associated with greys, to be honest with you. And one of the things, as you saw, all of the crop circles are very aesthetically appealing. They may be strange looking, but I don't know of any that turn people off, such as the alien energy that so often comes up in some of these reptilian or that type of thing. So I've never seen any association with that personally. My personal feeling, and people do ask me, I think it's interdimensional in nature. In other words, that we're dealing with a reality or life form that can go back and forth between our dimension of physical reality and other dimensions that aren't physical reality. That's what I feel.
Okay, and has there been any reports of contact between us and those aliens?
In terms of who makes the crop circles, there have been multiple, what I might call psychic contacts over the years. People have actually dreamed the crop circle will occur in a certain form. You know that, Barbara. And then they've occurred within days. I worked with a meditation group in Arizona a few years ago, and we actually designed our perfect crop circle, and it had 5 elements in it. And of the 5 elements, 4 of them came in a crop circle 24 hours later in England. I mean, it boggled all of us. So you see, that kind of contact, yes, physical contact, I've not heard of anything.
Any reptilians or insectoid?
There have been insect-looking crop circles, but I don't know of any connection to insectoid alien beings. No, or reptilian. No, I don't know of any.
Okay, thank you very much.
Final question.
Well, actually, I have 2.
Okay.
First, have you met with Colin Andrews?
Oh yes, Colin and I are old friends. I've known him for a dozen years now. I first was on a podium with Colin, I think it was in 1990 or 91. It was before I was married, so that goes back a while. And what else to know about Colin?
Oh yeah, and also this past summer, wasn't there a crop circle? I thought maybe you had shown it, but you didn't mention it, that it was a representation of the Mayan calendar.
Well, that was the one that I was showing you. That was the Mayan glyph, was the one that in fact was created in 2 different days' time, and it was a fill-in-the-blank crop circle. And I hate to say it, the discs left at the edge of the field, and the fact that it didn't come the way crop circles come, which is overnight in one swoop, to me says that I think they had help for that particular one, much as I would like it to be real. That's my opinion. Okay?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Great talk. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.